So what I want to do in those 45 minutes is something that was taught to me actually for the very first time in med school. Weird reason why at all, but then over and over again later on. And I feel it's something that doesn't get taught enough. It should be taught, and I kind of blame myself a bit for this. I should have done probably this workshop every 6 months or something, so that people, no, leave the door open, Q, so a bit of better air circulation. So that people that come into 10x, they first of all know what is expected from them if they want to make more money. How can they have a bit more fun? If they want to go into a managerial role, how to do this, and basically have all this fun. Now, there's always this discussion when people say, okay, Julian, why would you teach your employees how to ask for more money from the company? Isn't that more expensive? Well, and the right answer to this is, well, just imagine you have uninspired employees who don't ask for money, but they're staying, and you have all these uninspired employees who don't grow and who don't get better, right? And so it is such an important thing to learn these things. The 5 outcomes I really would love you to have after this 45 minutes is to understand what is, and sorry, there's actually a wrong word. What is a manager? What is a leader? How can you go into a career, or what does the career path mean? How do you ask for more money? And how can you have a bit more fun in what you're doing? Leave it open, Veronica, so there's circulation. And I would love to kind of work these things through so that we see this a little bit. There's a very famous quote from Jeff Bezos who says, you can have 3 things. The first one is a job, the next one is a career, and the last one is a calling. And he says the people that he sees that are the happiest and are the most fulfilled and actually make the most money are the people who understand in their entire progression what is their calling. And this is also what I kind of want to inspire you a bit over these 45 minutes to maybe get to. Because if we start with the very first one, right? We start with a job, then I think you all come in, you have outcomes, you have OKRs, and you all know what to do. And hopefully you get paid accordingly to that. But then it comes to the next point, and the next point is, how do you move from this job to the career? And that is a very interesting question. So when we ask ourselves career, then most people, when they think about a career, think of what? When they think of a career in a company, what do they think of? Moving up the career means mostly? Yeah, exactly. Becoming like a manager, having a team, growing. And in many, many companies, there's this fallacy where you have managers make all the money, but then the experts, and we call them experts, they don't make the money. They don't get all the incentives. It's always on a managerial level. And this forces something very strange, and it makes people who are actually really, really good at what they're doing to take the manager route, because that's the route that gives them success. That's the route that gives them the money. That's the route that gives them control. And there was very few companies, actually Apple was one of the very first ones together with Google, who kind of shaped this path, and this not so long ago, that they started to shape this in a more successful role and say, hey, we need to be sure that we make it clear for our people how the managerial career works and how the expert career works. And this is what I want to walk you through basically now. Let's go and start with the easier one. Let's start with the expert one. Just because it's easier doesn't mean it's less important. What is the expert role on the expert career path in your opinion?
Be good at what you're doing.
They're really good at what they're doing, yeah?
Because for a manager, part of the responsibility is to manage people.
Yep.
So for this role, they are not doing that part.
Correct.
So they can focus on their own work.
Correct. So they just want to get better and better and better at what they're doing. Hopefully they become world class. And so here's a very nice thing. So there you can. That's why I want this basically. It's called this Radford, this company who makes this survey and kind of benchmark stuff. And if you go onto the very last page, so we're going to skip the first, and we're just going to go to page 5 and page 6. You will see that these experts get split into 2 types of roles. You have the so-called professional individuals, and if you go to the very last page, you have the support individuals. And the only difference between those is the professional individuals are those where a study is required or where there's a very specific professional direction. So this is not just something that someone can pick up, but there needs to be a certain kind of background. For example, a very typical case is law, for example, or finance. There's a lot of areas where you need to have the professional kind of path. Now, this is where now it gets very interesting. So what you can look at, and they use a very, very nice kind of example, and they talk about rope making. So I'm going to stay on the professional one. It doesn't matter if you stay on the professional one or on the support one on the next page. It is the same kind of principles. It's just that they use a different kind of shape there. And so basically, if you want to progress on the expert level, what you should do is, and we're going to do this exercise, is where do you see yourself right now on these 6 levels? And I'm going to help you a little bit. And then ask yourself, how can you move to the next level, to the next level, to the next level? Because here is a big fallacy. The fallacy is this. If you stay at a company, let's say at 10x, and you stay here for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, but you always stay at the same level, the only thing that you're going to get is you're going to get small, gradual increments in salary, because the longer you stay with a company, normally you become more valuable to the company because of your early experience. But if you want to have a significant income jump, also more responsibilities, you will need to move to the next level, and you will need to move to the next level. And that is something that's very interesting. So let's walk these 6 levels through, and let's just use the analogies that you see at the very beginning. So entry level learns about rope. So this is like a profession is rope making, right? Which just think about how this applies to your own kind of career. So let's move to the next one. Can tie basic notes. Next one, level 3, calculates rope strength, knows a lot about ropes already. Level 4, understands rope making. 5th one, knows more about rope making than the manager, so myself, who's kind of looking at this person, ever will. And the last one is invented nylon, right? And so think about what this means for yourself, right? And what level you think you are on right now. This is the first kind of exercise I would love you to do right now. So put yourself, think about what level on this are you on. Mark this down for yourself. You can either mark it on there or you mark it on a piece of paper. If you are not 100% sure, then look a bit about the definitions on the bottom. At the very bottom, you also see some timelines, what it normally takes. Now, be careful, right? There's people who are in an industry for 3 years, and they can be already a level 5, a level 6. And you have people who can be in something for 10 years, and they are a level 1 or a level 2. There's also another very important fallacy, right? And be careful for this fallacy. And that fallacy is, you're on route A for a certain job, right? So let's say medicine, right? I'm going to use my example. And let's say I was a level, and I was not, but let's use this example, 5. I'm going to change to a different profession now, and this can be a small profession. It can even be that I'm shifting from a trauma surgeon and I become, I don't know, a dermatologist. I am not a level 5 anymore. I immediately drop somewhere else, right? So you can't just transfer these things around and say, I get level 5 here, so I'm always a level 5. Does that make sense? Okay, so everyone has this? Okay, so what this now means for you is the following. If you want to move to the next level, then ask yourself, what would you need to do? And all these roles are actually expert roles. So nothing here means you ever need to build a team. Now, you might sit here and you're like, okay, actually, I'm not so interested in this. We're going to talk about the other side. But if this interests you, then really think about how can you move to the next level? What do you need to do? And I'm going to give you some kind of general tips then afterwards, what you would have to do and what's definitely going to help you to move up. And it's something called strategic planning that's going to be very relevant. But this is really relevant. So push yourself there and kind of understand this. Now, how does this relate? Well, how does this relate is especially as a benchmarking. You could, for example, go and when you discuss, let's say, a salary increase with your manager or with the HR team, you could say, hey, look, at the moment, when you hired me a year ago, I was a level 4. At the moment, I see myself more on the level 5. What's my benchmarking for a level 5 according to this benchmark? And then immediately, you qualify for a completely new salary if this is warranted and it makes sense. So this is a very rational and numbers approach kind of measurement, because we have this all the time when people say, hey, I would like to have a salary increase. Okay, but what do you base your salary increase on? Also, when people come in and they ask for salary, then this is a very typical discussion point. And so we rationalize or kind of number that, right? And I think most people are not aware of that. They sit there and they think, okay, so I'm making some X, How can I make $1,000 more a month? Well, this is exactly how. Another thing you should do with your manager, and the reason I don't want to go into detail here, because I know that probably Alvin is going to do this differently than I, is going to do different than, I know, Lillian or Bettina. Everyone does this kind of different. You should discuss this with your manager. You should go and say, listen, I would love to go to the next level. How do I go to the next level? And discuss this. And this should be part of your OKRs. This should be part of your career. What would you need from me? And this is really, really relevant in this entire kind of flow for if this is the interesting route for you. Are there questions on this kind of route? If you ever feel that you are in 10x and you are being underpaid because you're not going the manager route, then you should definitely come to me, because this is something I don't want. For example, we did at the very beginning a big mistake, for example, with Michael Spurk. Most of you actually don't know him that well because he's not so much in Singapore, but he is one of our original founders. But he never had the aspiration of becoming a manager. He never wanted to. He always wanted to stay in the expert route. And at the very beginning, we kind of discounted that. And we were like, no, this is not so good. You should become a manager role. And only when he had the full expert route, he completely prospered and he loved it and he became super happy and successful. So don't ever feel the pressure that you should go into the manager route if that's not what makes you happy. Okay? Then let's not go into the expert role. We kind of discussed this. Let's go into the other role. And let's go into the manager role. And let's first ask, what's the difference between a manager and a leader in your opinion? Is one better than the other? Who has seen this picture on Instagram or on social media where you have the manager in the back with the whip, whipping the people moving, and you have the leader in the front helping to pull? Right? Have you seen this picture? Yeah. So I think this picture is really misleading, and I don't think it's a good picture. Right? It paints a completely wrong idea, in my opinion. Because there is no better or worse between the two. Both have different skills, and both are just as much needed. So let's define a couple of things. What, why, how? What are outcomes? What needs to be done? What needs to be achieved? Why is the reasoning behind it? How is the actual execution? Now, there's a huge fallacy in all that we do, and the huge fallacy is we love to take the how to, we talk about the how too early. And the how tortures us to not think further. So here is where it gets really interesting. If you have a really, really good team, you let experts, if you're a manager, you let experts handle the how. Because they should be so much better than anyone else at the actual execution. As a manager, you manage outcomes. You don't manage people. Managing people, you know how the people that you manage, how they call this? Micromanaging. No one likes micromanaging. So you don't manage people, you manage outcomes and processes, but not the people. What do you do with people? You lead people. This is really important. Many, many people, including myself, cannot do both. You hardly ever meet someone who's a great manager and a great leader. Most of the time, you have someone who's better in one or the other. And it's really important that you find the right people for each thing. It's really important that you find great managers who manage outcomes and who manage processes, and it's important to find leaders who lead people. What does it mean to lead? What makes a great leader? Please.
Inspire.
Okay, great. That's the most important thing. Inspiration. There's a really great book that I can highly recommend. I read it, I think, 1.5 years ago from Jocko Willink, Extreme Ownership. I don't know, has any one of you ever read that book, Extreme Ownership? I can highly recommend that book. Alvin, you read it? It's a really great book, Extreme Ownership. It's a fantastic book that talks about, he was a US, I'm not sure what his title was, but he was someone in the army and they fought in Iraq, and he talked about teams and leadership and management in how this works and what people should watch out for and how to kind of have great leadership and great teamwork. And he talked about how great leaders lead to inspiration. And there's this famous kind of little story that you all know. How do you get people to build a boat so you can kind of sail out into the sea? Right? The people on the island, so how do you do it? Well, and then there's these two villages. So one village, this person is a really great manager. And this person goes and sets very clear outcomes, tells them what has to be done, by what time frame does this have to be done, and so on and so on. So they set very, very, very clear kind of outcomes, right? And it works really, really well. And the other village goes with a totally different approach. And they just, here the leader goes and gives people this deep interest to go out into the sea. Inspires them. Doesn't go much into the outcomes or what has to be done. Now, the process where the leader goes is a bit more chaotic, but the people are very, very inspired. And they all figure out how to do it, and they build the boat, and then they all sail out. On the other side, the manager is very, very process-oriented, and they also get it done, maybe with a little bit less fun, because they don't really understand why they're doing it. So if you do this really right, in a company, you always try to have good managers and good leaders. If you're lacking one, you either you have complete chaos because you're lacking the managers, or you lack inspiration, you lack fun, you lack the drive. The biggest mistake that people manage is the how. This should be done by experts. This is so irrelevant. And if you ever become a good manager, you don't want to micromanage. You want to hire people that you can inspire, where you can set outcomes, but then you let people get to work and let them work self-sufficiently. Now, let's go and look at the management job level chart. These are the first 2 pages. I don't know for who of you is more interested to go more of the managerial role. Now remember, very important, you don't need to be an expert, like a super experienced level 6, to become a good manager. Actually, most people that go to manager role most of the time are actually not the best experts in their field. They are really good at managing outcomes. Now, I have to also admit, I've never met a really good manager who knows nothing about their field, because it's really, really difficult to inspire people and to manage processes and outcomes, right? But there's a big mistake when you have someone who's really, really good and you put them just because they're so good in a manager role, and suddenly they suck because they're not good at managing outcomes and leading people. So be careful that you think you need to become an expert in order to be a good manager, but also be really careful that you don't need to be a good manager just to move up the career ladder at 10x. So you can look and you see level 1 supervisor, right? A supervisor is generally someone, and you can see this here, this is a different analogy. Here we talk about mountain climbing, is someone who escorts hikers on day trips, right? So it's like small group. A supervisor might lead one person. Here, you can see discretion. This is always what happens if something goes wrong. Well, false decisions or failure to achieve results may cause delays in schedule. And you will see this. At level 1 and level 2, if they don't do their job well, what happens is some small thing gets delayed. This is typical for a team lead, in this case, a supervisor 1 and a supervisor level 2. If they do something wrong, the small little project is delayed. Now let's go to the next page. We talk about level 3 and level 4. And level 3 is a manager, level 4 senior manager. Don't get stuck on the names, okay? This is just how they define it. It's not about the names. It's about basic principles. Now here you can see already, a level 3 leads extended alpine mountain climbing trips. If they do something wrong, level 3 and level 4, if they do something wrong, what happens, it's not only a time delay, there's also a cost factor to it. So you suddenly lose money, you burn money, you invest money in the wrong thing. Right? Very, very important. So most people, when they start and they have a small group, so they might have one person in their team, they're supervisors. And all they care about is time. So they're like, I was on time, but I delivered on time, but I was on time. And it's always about time, 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 time. You notice that people move up to a level 3 and to a level 4 once they start thinking about money. And suddenly they start valuing and budgeting things differently. They might be willing to be a bit slower to save money, or they might be a bit faster but burning money at the same time. So suddenly they start trading certain things. And their thinking becomes more complex. Does that make sense? Now let's move to the next one, and we are at level 5. Here's a director. Again, don't get stuck on an individual name. A director is generally someone who has team level 3s in their group. And now it gets really interesting. If a level 5 or a level 6 screws something up, an entire department gets messed up. An entire department. This can be that there's a huge disruption in the department. It has to be that there's maybe a lawsuit in this department. It might be that an entire product completely falls apart because the decision making or some kind of structure is completely falls apart. And then we go into level 7, level 8. This is vice president, senior vice president. And here, the entire company is at risk. The entire company is at risk. So if these people make like fatal mistakes, they risk the entire company. And I can give you a couple of those examples so you kind of understand also the process, the thinking of this, right? So I always love to talk about mistakes because you learn way more about the successes. So for example, one of the major mistakes, in my opinion, where I had my decision, huge impact on the entire company that I wish that we would have done different. But I owned the decision and it kind of had an entire change. And this was, for example, the token listing last year with Binance. We could have, an entire year ago, we could have listed our token on Binance. And because of a decision that made a lot of sense to me back then, and I would probably still make the same decision again and again and again back then with the information I had back then, I declined a token listing on Binance. Now, Binance then became unexpectedly one of the largest exchanges in the world, and the liquidity from Binance would have helped the pay token a lot. And at the same time, I might have not been the most polite with the CEO of Binance, so he was kind of upset with this, the way I responded, but he was one of hundreds of exchanges that reached out to us. And so, yeah, I kind of decimated our chances to get listed last year. I think we're going to have a new chance this year. But this is something where, looking back, was not a smart decision, right? And I'm risking a lot. I risked a lot on this. But so, here's the point. Would you be willing to take the decision and own the decision and also the consequences? And this is exactly where you have to kind of think and place yourself. So what I would kind of challenge you right now is, where do you see yourself on this chart if you see yourself at higher than level 1, for example? And are you interested in moving up on this chart? And if yes, how could you move up? Reflect on this right now for 1 minute. Think about, where are you on this chart? Which level are you on? What would you need to learn? What would you need to have a bit more complexity in your thinking? Are you thinking in monetary terms? Okay, you must be somewhere in 3 and 4. Are you thinking 5 and 6, more complex team terms already, entire departments? Are you thinking in entire company terms? And then ask yourself, if you are, let's say you are level 2, supervisor, okay, how would you move into level 3? What are decisions right now that your team lead makes for you that over the next 6 months you could own and you could start owning? And again, do you need to take this route? No, you don't. It's completely your choice. You can say, you know what, I don't care about all this. I'm just going to become the best person in my role that I could ever be. And I'm going to become world class in this. And trust me, you're going to make shitloads of money. You're going to have a lot of fun. You're going to be respected. Some of the most successful people in the industry come out of this area. So, I'm going to give you something now that most people have never seen, have never heard, are not being taught, and it's a shame. And it's something that Steve Jobs came up with. And people after him copied it and copied it and copied it. And it was a challenge that happened the following. Some of you might know Steve Jobs didn't really get ousted from Apple. It's a false story. He had to leave the CEO position, but then he left the company by himself. And when he left the company, he started a new company called Next. And he recruited a lot of people from Apple over to Next. Now, the problem there was that because Next was so small, he suddenly had a whole lot of people that originally were working on different product lines, but had the same kind of level in a different product line. So one might have been working on a computer, and another one was maybe working on a printer, but it was the same kind of level, it was just a different product. So now they all started at Next, and at Next they only had one product, which was a little cube that was working, like that was for mainly universities for research stuff. So he had this major problem now that he had, I don't know exactly how many people he had, I think it was like 120 people coming in, and he had to structure them. And so he asked himself, how should I structure these people? Who should I put on top of who? And this is a very interesting question. How would you do it? By experience, by pay grade, how would you? He came up with a term called structured creative planning. And he ranked people that way. And many great leaders, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, a lot of CEOs after him completely copied that. And I think one of the most famous examples today is Jeff Bezos. He became a master of this, but it's very, very interesting. And so the way it works is this way. What Steve Jobs noticed was, the further into the future, no matter whether you're a manager or an expert, the further you're in the future, you had structured, creative planning. So that means you're creative about it. You have ideas. You don't just go a beaten path. You're just quite creative, but it's structured. So that means you don't just say, you know what, in 7 years, we want to have 200 million customers. You actually have some kind of structure. Now, obviously, there's a lot of gaps in this structure over 7 years, but you kind of have a structure. So he noticed the further people had structured creative planning into the future, the higher up he put them. Because he said, most employees, when they're completely fresh, all they think is one day. That's all they care about, one day. So they only think about the next day. What do I have to do today? What do I have to do tomorrow? At some point, they start thinking in weekly terms. And then he noticed most employees get stuck at monthly terms. That's why they get stuck. So they only think in monthly terms. That's where they stop. And because that has to do with salary, that's just where they stop. But then he noticed some people manage to go quarterly, 3 months. And that's, again, major breaking point. And then he noticed very, very few people can go to 1 year. And he hardly ever meets people who can go further. So his goal was always to be longer than a year. So his goal was always to be 3 years. Now, Jeff Bezos now, Elon Musk also, Mark Zuckerberg, I'm not sure where he is, but Jeff Bezos, and there are studies that analyze this, they go to at least 7 years. He noticed the further down he had creative, structured creative planning, the easier it was for these people to have a lot of foresight, to be way more prepared, and he put those people on top and have manager skills over other people. So what happened was he even had experts who didn't want to manage and just put them either completely aside of someone. So he might have had a manager. So he had a manager who might have a foresight of 1 year, but he had an expert who had experience for 3 years, and he just put the expert out because the expert would have been limited by the manager's vision for only 1 year. So what this means for you is ask yourself right now and write it down, how far into the future do you do structured creative planning at the moment for 10x? How far? Be completely honest. How far do you think about consequences, about what you have to do, about your work, about projects, about your timeline? Where do you see yourself right now? Write this down. You can also, if you want, think about your manager. How far do you think that person thinks? Think about if you're leading a team, how far do they think? One of the most important qualities I've ever learned about team creation and about team planning. And so obviously, here's the interesting challenge. This is a must. No matter whether you want to become a better expert or a better manager, you need to move this direction. So ask yourself, how can you get, if you're right now, and most of the people here in the room will be somewhere between here, between 7 and 28 days. That's most of the structured creative planning. That's just how the standard process is. It's completely like very, most of the people here, very few people here. So ask yourself, how can you move to maybe 3 months? How can you move to 1 year? And here is the key thing. You need to remind yourself every single day about this. Because the natural behavior is to automatically compress and go back there. And you can watch interviews of Jeff Bezos, for example, and he always says, the founder and CEO of Amazon, and he says he always wants to think at least 7 years into the future. Always. Because he knows he hires people that think at least 3 years. So if he wants to stay relevant, he needs to have even more foresight. And here's the problem. Here is where chaos starts. If you don't have the gaps in between. So if you push yourself to go forward, but you don't pull other people afterwards, you're going to have a gap. Because if you constantly think in 3 years and someone else thinks in 28 days, well, you're going to have a lot of gaps here in between. So you always need to be sure that you drag people there to make sure that they are structured. And also, if your team lead is kind of not having enough foresight, you're going to be frustrated. Now here's an interesting effect that happens. So let's draw this up. So let's say this is the entire time horizon here. And let's say this is someone who has, and let's just make the timeline here, I don't know, 1 month's horizon. This is what they see. Now here's where it gets really interesting, and I'm going to give you a very good story from Amazon. Jeff Bezos came. Let's say he's up here. No, let's not put him that far up so we have a bit of space. Jeff Bezos came, this kind of view, and suggested we should make reviews on Amazon. What do you think these people here that had a lot less vision said about making reviews on Amazon? What do you think what their feedback was? We should have reviews of our products. Great. What a great suggestion, okay? And this is actually a very important lesson. Great suggestion. What do you think these people said, especially when they are in sales and marketing, when suddenly there were negative reviews? And it became clear that the negative reviews stopped potential customers from buying the product. Because they looked at the book, or they looked at, I don't know, a toothbrush, and the review was negative. And then the customer didn't buy. What do you think these people said to Jeff? Hey, we should only post the positive reviews, because otherwise we're hurting our own business. People are not buying the products. We need to post the negative reviews as well. Why is this difference in belief structure? Well, for us today, it's obvious, because many people actually said, you can look at the stock price. During this time, the stock price got hammered because so many reporters and newspapers who have all the time horizon of 1 day, most of these newspapers, right? They don't care long term. They just care about news. They all just said, hey, Amazon is completely killing themselves with these negative reviews. But what happened was the exact opposite, because today we understand it's all about authenticity and customers want to have the honest feedback from the product. Here's where there's the important lesson. If you do gradual improvements, you need to ask for customer feedback, and you need to include as many people into your decision, especially with the same time horizon. This is a really important lesson. If you're trying to innovate, by definition, you are not allowed to ask your customer, and you're not allowed to ask people with a different time horizon, because they come from a completely different idea. This means time horizon down. You can't, because they have a completely different idea. And this is why sometimes we have this internal friction between cards and Comet. Comet is a completely different time horizon than the cards. The cards is something that's going to be very relevant over the next 7 years. Comet is going to be irrelevant over the next couple of years, and it's going to start being relevant maybe in 7 years. And this is a really important question, an important thing. So the reason I'm telling you this is something called innovation. If you want to innovate, and everyone always wants to innovate, right? Companies always want to be innovative, people want to be innovative. The way you're innovative is by increasing your time horizon and then not being discouraged by feedback from people with a lower time horizon. This is what's really important. You need to not listen to people with a smaller time horizon. They are not wrong. They just look at different things. Here is the flip side of the coin. It always sounds so great to have a great time horizon. What is the flip side, the downside, if your time horizon is really large? What are you more likely to do? Mistakes. Why are you more likely to do mistakes? Because no one can predict the future. So the further out the future is, the more likely it is to make mistakes. So if you become an expert and you move all the way up, you become a manager and you move higher, you need to learn to own your mistakes. And you need to be aware that you're going to be making a lot of mistakes. So this is the flip side of the coin, but you will have to do this. And I think Jeff Bezos is famous for saying, I don't know, I think he has lost money on 800 different ideas already. He writes this stuff down, and he claims he only made money on 5 ideas so far. And that's fine, because those five ideas made him $100 billion. right? So, and actually there's many entrepreneurs who say that, who say, you know, you can be wrong on 100 great ideas. If you're one, you just keep swinging, and you're not like in baseball where after 4 swings you're out. You can keep swinging, right? And you could just keep swinging. So you need to do a risk-reward kind of measure control. So why do I tell you all this? Well, it's very simple. I think everyone benefits from gradual increase in time horizon. Very, very important. Don't start jumping, because you're going to start making more mistakes, and it's going to frustrate you, and you're going to get insecure about this. And you shouldn't. Most people, let's pick a month, right? So most people get a monthly goal, a monthly budget, and they should work on this. And this has nothing to do with what you do on an individual day. But the question is, what problems are you trying to solve? Are you trying to solve problems that fall within the 28 days, or are you trying to solve problems that fall within the 3 months? And so it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a good time management on an individual day, but you should not start putting these things in order to overtake the 3 months problems. What you should do is, you should have people in your team who manage these things. Or if you're an expert, you should just start focusing on working in a team, not leading the team, but working in a team where you start working on a bit larger projects. Trust me, the goal, like, I'm not sure if people will ever get 2, 3, or 7 years. I'm personally struggling with 1 year. I'm really struggling. It's very difficult to have a very structured plan. I see this when I have to do a budget. It's really, really difficult. Like, to do an exact budget for just 1 year, it's really, really difficult, right? So most people always say, like, I've done this workshop I remember, in a very large company in Germany. And one guy, and I said, so who thinks they are at 3 months? And I'm not doing this here, but I did it there. And like, a lot of people raised their hand, right? And then I said, who of you think is in 1 year? And I'm not kidding. I don't know, 1/4 of the room raised their hand. This is absolutely not true. This is ridiculously not true. Most people are good if they get to 28 days, just because they don't care. In their normal work, they don't care. If they don't know this information, they don't care. So what happens is, just like you say, people start getting pushed back to the 1-day problems. The 1-day problems. And this is normal, but you're not allowed to do this. And we can do a total different workshop on time management, right? Important versus urgency. What's important, what's urgent. And we could discuss this. Very interesting matters in this case. So to finish with something, so we talked about managing, we talked about leadership, talked about the career path. Let's talk about the last 2 topics. Let's talk about money and fun, right? So we talked about benchmarking. You see some benchmarking there, right? I think this is really straight which path you're taking. And you can reflect this, right? And the easiest way to reflect this is, you came in with a salary, and ask yourself, did you just do your job really well, which is what you get paid for, and if you keep doing your job really well, you get your annual progression? Or are you moving and completely leapfrogging into other categories, which is what we would love you to do. We would love you to become excellent managers. We would love you to become better experts. We would love that, right? I mean, literally, I would love all of you to move up into expert level 6. And I would love all of you to move as high up in the career ladder as you feel and how your responsibilities are happening. And then when you have your, I don't know, semi-annual or every 6 months, every 12 months review with your team lead, this is a very, very good point to bring this up and also ask for the next 3 months, 6 months, year. Normally, you don't move up these ladders in monthly timeframes. You don't start thinking in, I don't know, 3 months or 1 year terms you don't change this in a week. It takes months and years to do that. But then it's a very good time to bring this up and say, hey, look, I would love to know, I don't know, I've been here a year, how can I get a significant increase in my bonus? How do I not just get my, I don't know, annual 4 or 5% off that's like adapted to inflation, and just because you're doing a good job here and you get more experience, but how can I get 20, 30, 40, 50% bonus increases in pay? And the way you do it is by moving up these places. And now here's an important part. Money alone is not gonna make you happy, right? You need to have fun and you need to enjoy what you're doing. So if you take a path that makes you completely miserable, and you do this just because it pays you, there will be this point when you completely forget what Jeff Bezos says. You either have a job, a career, or a calling. And the best thing is if you manage to become it a calling. So how do you find your calling? Well, he says the calling finds you, you can find a calling. And I think that's partly right. But I think there's also something else. And there is, look at other people who walk a path that you think is a great path, not just because it looks great, but the entire package is what you think makes fun. It's great to have this kind of family. It's this great to have this kind of time off. It's this great to have this kind of responsibilities. It's great to have this kind of decision making. So see the entire package. Don't only look at the upsides. And then look at this person and say, okay, what is the path that this person took? This can be in a different company. Learn from that. Look at here. And just take the same kind of path. It's very easy. Similar actions lead to similar results. Don't trick yourself, right? Don't think you can do something else but get the same results as someone who does something completely different. And also, this was, for example, the reason I quit medicine. I started looking at all my higher doctors who were 20 years ahead of me. And I looked at them, and I was so convinced that medicine was going to be the right path for me. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I don't want to end up like these people. They have, like, okay money. They have no time. They never see their family. They have the same shitty lifestyle that I had with like 24, working weekends, like overnights, crazy kind of things. And like, of course, they had all this great respect and all this, like they had nice houses and nice cars because they were making good money. But I was like, this is never ever what I want to have when I'm, I don't know, 50 or something. I don't want to have this, right? I want to have way more flexibility. And so I knew this is not going to be what I could do for the rest of my life. So this is my last point here. You need to know that what you're doing doesn't necessarily have to be the final calling, but man, you need to have some fun doing this, right? And you need to kind of connect that what you're doing is going to bring you to where you would love to end up. And this is also a really good point that you should discuss with your team lead. You should. This is exactly the question that also Alvin said. Where would you like to end up? Where would you like to get to? And discuss this and find this point. You're here, you want to get there. You might need to go here, 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 but sometimes you end up there. And you're going to see this general progression, and that's exactly what's going to make you really, really happy. Because money alone is definitely not going to make you happy. Money and knowing how to spend it and spending your time wisely with talented people that help you grow, that help you learn, that's going to give you a lot of pleasure and a lot of fulfillment. I'm pretty sure about that. So what I would love you, and I hope all these outcomes were fulfilled, is really to kind of ask you a couple of things. First of all, which of the roles do you want to take? Do you want to take the expert role? Do you want to take the manager role? There's nothing wrong with doing both. There's nothing wrong. Hardly ever I meet someone who is outstanding at both. Hardly ever. Most of the time I meet someone who tends into one direction. And there's nothing wrong. And I hope we're going to foster a culture here where both sides get incentivized in a similar way. Right? This is one of the first kind of questions. The next thing is, where do you see yourself on this? This is just a benchmark. Just don't see this as, this is not the rule book. This is not the black and white. This is there because it's easy to understand, and it makes some nice stories, and it talks about road making or about climbing a mountain and what this means. And put yourself, think, what does this mean for your career, for your job, for your field? And how can you move up to the next level, to the next level, to the next level? Discuss this in your quarterly or in every 6 months or in your annual kind of reviews with your team lead. And also ask, hey, what do you think? How can I move to the next level? How could I not only get my 5 or 6% pay increase, but I know how can I make 10%, 20%, 30%? How can I leapfrog into something else? And then do something that gives you a lot of pleasure and fulfillment at the same time, because that is at the end what makes the team members at 10x that I would love to have, right? People who work hard, who solve challenging problems, who inspire each other. But then obviously who come to work, and not every day is fun, we all know this, but a lot of the days should be fun. And I think that's always the key thing. And if then you put in some of the structured creative planning, I think you can really be a baller and change a lot of things. If you are interested in the innovation, remember, innovation always means you need to have a bigger time horizon, and you dare to take risks, you dare to make some mistakes. Whenever you try to innovate, you will get rejection. You will. That's by definition the rule of innovation, right? No one is ready for your innovation because by definition, most people tend to be in a lower time horizon than those people with the great innovation. Any questions? Fantastic. I hope this helps you. I hope this makes you really, really successful team members at 10x. I hope that helps. And thank you so much.